Good morning and welcome to the Caregiver Teleconnection. My name is Glenda Rogers and I'm going to be your facilitator for today's call. Today we have with us Lucy Barylak and Dr. Elliot Montgomery Sklar. My mouth is not working. We're going to be talking about Disaster Preparedness 101 for caregivers, a really important topic for us. So before they get started with the presentation, let me tell you a little bit about Lucy and Elliot. Lucy Barylak has a master's degree in social work from McGill University. She is presently working as a consultant for a health network in Montreal, Canada. She's been involved in various research projects and has published numerous articles related to caregiving issues. She has lectured at several universities and colleges on innovative approaches to caregiving and presents annually at international and national conferences. Lucy is also a consultant for private industry in the United States, including her work with the WellMed Charitable Foundation and clinics in Texas. And Lucy would also like you to know that she was a caregiver for her mother for about 10 years. Dr. Elliot Montgomery Sklar is an associate professor of health science at Nova Southeastern University in Florida. He has worked as an educator, researcher, and leader of community-based health programs in the United States and Canada for over 15 years. He has a doctorate degree in public health and is credentialed by FEMA. Elliot has led disaster preparedness workshops for healthcare centers across Florida and published research on how this issue affects vulnerable populations, such as the elderly, caregivers, and the homeless. Welcome, and Lucy and Elliot. We're so glad you're with us today.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be talking about this because for those of us who live in the South, hurricane season is in full effect. Actually, the official start of the season was on June 1st and it runs until November 30th. But we've certainly had storms before and after those dates. The reason why our program today is so timely is that September 10th, right around the date that we are today, is actually the peak of hurricane season. And so while it has been active in the Atlantic, I think we've been certainly lucky so far, and now we're on the downward trend. So fingers crossed, and that's why I said I'm happy to be speaking about this because it seems to be a pretty good season thus far. But we're not just going to be talking today about hurricanes. Many of the tips for hurricane preparedness actually relate to a number of disasters, and I believe personally that preparing for them is key. And that's why September is National Preparedness Month, and each year FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, recognizes the month with a different theme or focus. This year's theme is actually on minority populations, which are often more affected profoundly by natural disasters. We certainly saw that to be true during Hurricane Katrina, for example. Planning is so important for any disaster, but when you have limited resources, it makes planning sometimes more challenging. And we know that caregivers sometimes are juggling with competing priorities financially and with their time. So planning can be a challenge. So we're going to try to really streamline and simplify things. A little bit about myself. I grew up actually close to where Lucy lives in Canada. And so when I moved to Florida to go to graduate school, we had a tropical storm hit within a few weeks of my relocating to Miami. I was petrified. I didn't know what to do at all. I bought inflatable pool rafts and I duct taped them to my windows in case of anything hitting the windows. And it's something that I still talk about because to me it's funny. It's what really motivated me to become interested in disaster preparedness, because obviously if something were to come through my window, an inflatable pool raft would not have helped me very much. So I took classes in disaster preparedness. I took FEMA courses, and eventually I wound up traveling across Florida to provide disaster preparedness training for federally qualified health centers, including homeless shelters. And what always struck me when I worked with individuals experiencing homelessness is that hurricanes never posed a concern for them, even though they didn't have shelter. But by virtue of that, they didn't have a house that they had to worry about. They had all of their belongings with them at all times. And it was something I never thought about, but it was certainly very true. Now, here we go. In June of 2009, I was working in this building here as a health programs manager on Miami Beach in a community center. And this building is just a few blocks from the beach. It's actually a historic landmark building. I was running a falls prevention program on the first floor of the building. And then I had a meeting on the second floor. The conference room on the second floor was made out of poured concrete. This building is from the 1950s, and the conference room had no windows. Out of nowhere, we had a rainstorm that didn't last but an hour. But the amount of rain was something I had never before seen. And this was my car. Now, I'll never forget that walk home. Aside from that, I was trapped in the building where I had worked for hours waiting for the water to recede and people could be evacuated. We had a group of seniors on the first floor of the building, and the first floor had flooded along with the elevator shaft. We were literally carrying people up flights of stairs. So learning how to deal with crisis and disasters was and continues to be a necessary part of living in Florida. But this is really the same for many other parts of the country. Now, since this time, I've been living in Florida for 18 years now, and I've been through 2 Category 3 storms while sheltering in place. We will be sharing our presentation slides today, but you may want to get a pen and paper because we'll be providing a lot of tips and some specific information. Now, remember, as Glenda said, these sessions are recorded too, and you can certainly refer back to the recording if you find this helpful. We also would love to get feedback, and we're happy to offer additional sessions to help you feel more prepared. So please do complete our post-session evaluation if you can. Really, the goal here is that the best thing we can do in the event of natural disasters is to be prepared and to feel prepared. And I think that that's especially true right now as well, with many people having relocated to different parts of the country during the pandemic. Many people, including older folks and caregivers, are not experienced with dealing with natural disasters in the areas in which they might be living. Now, Glenda, you also mentioned that winter storm in Texas you all had a couple years back. You know, these things can happen, and what we're seeing is that weather is becoming more extreme. Now, we're going to talk as well today about tornadoes, as I had mentioned. The difference between things like hurricanes and tornadoes is that we have time to prepare for some weather events, whereas we don't have that same luxury of time with others. So having an emergency kit or a grab and go bag, which we'll talk about today, can really serve you well in any disaster. One of the things that I've learned during my experiences here, going through some of the storms in Florida, is that at this time of the year, I keep less in my freezer, and instead I freeze large Ziploc bags of water. They form large chunks of ice. But what I learned is that they melt a lot slower in a cooler if I lose power than actual ice cubes. And this way, I also won't lose a lot of frozen food. Another very important thing is to keep your car fueled up routinely. I never let my tank go below half at this time of the year. And every time I go grocery shopping, I pick up a jug of water. That way it's not overwhelming and I don't have to lug a whole ton of water. I also stock up on batteries. These are things that I think are very important to have on hand. Also a battery backup for your phone, which I'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later. But I think, certainly it's important as well that we keep on top of the news. But what I've learned is that during times of crisis, one of the things that's most important for caregivers is to manage stress and anxiety. And that can be very difficult to do if you watch the news and you look at some of these pictures that I took of my own television screen during some rainstorms that we had here in South Florida. And so I really believe in practicing routine self-care because that way, if you're going through a stressful experience or a stressful, time, be it a natural disaster or otherwise, you have a better sort of baseline of where your stress and anxiety level is. And this is something that Lucy will talk more about.
That's for sure. It reminded me for the ice storm that we had here. My youngest daughter was 4 years old at the time. No electricity, no heat, and I know how unprepared we were for that. And I have to say, when you said that you keep your car half, as soon as I'm the same way. My car has to be full of gasoline. Yeah, one of the things, as Elliot said, the storm always brings about is a sense of anxiety, stress, which is really normal. Strong emotions like fear, sadness, or other symptoms of depression are normal as long as they are temporary and don't interfere with daily activities. That's what we need to keep in mind. If these emotions last too long or cause other problems, it's really a different story. Sometimes stress can be good. It can help you develop skills needed to manage potentially threatening situation. Stress can be harmful, however, when it is prolonged or severe enough to make you feel overwhelmed and out of control. And that would challenge your ability to plan and prepare as you might need to ahead of the storm. So the best way to manage stress in hard times are through self care, as Elliot said, and self care is part of disaster preparation. If we adapt habits that are healthy, that set us up to cope better with stressful times and situations. So, coping techniques like taking breaks, eating healthy food, and exercising can help prevent and reduce burnout and secondary traumatic stress. Recognize the signs of burnout and stress and be sure those are need to, if you need a break, then by all means take it. Think about what you would do to manage stress in a crisis situation.
I think those are such great points, and when we think of disaster planning and disaster preparedness, we don't think of mental health and doing what we can to prepare by maintaining good habits, especially during hurricane season. Ahead of storms, I used to go out for walks until the weather would begin to turn. And as soon as it was safe to go back out, I was back out walking. During storms, gyms closed. And for me personally, exercise is my way of coping with stress. So we think of disaster preparedness, typically in very practical terms, but I really do believe that preparing also means taking care of our health and well-being overall. It also means taking care of our homes and our apartments routinely. So think about the things that you have outside. At this time of the year, for example, are there tree limbs that you might need to be trimmed? Does your garage need to be cleared out of clutter? I know that my garage rarely has space for my car to fit in it. So at the beginning of hurricane season, we started making a routine of clearing out the garage and making sure that we can fit the car in if we have to, because we use it sort of as a storage facility. I think it's also important to think about our physical limitations. Are you physically able to move items from your patio or your balcony safely if you had to? And this is something that I've just had to sort of think about. We have potted plants that are very, very heavy, too heavy for us to carry and move. So we got planter caddies on wheels to place under them to make it much more easy to move them. It's just one less thing to have to worry about. Another as well is thinking about if your bathtub is able to hold water. Often we're told during a storm, ahead of a storm, to fill our bathtubs with water. So does your drain stop work? Are you able to safely park your car or garage it somewhere, either at a bit of a higher level or obviously in a garage, which would be ideal? These are not things that are obvious parts of planning, but they're important whether or not you evacuate or if you shelter in place. And I think that's one of the hardest things, especially for caregivers, is deciding whether to stay or to go if a storm comes. And that answer is going to be different for everyone. It can be very hard to relocate a loved one who may have mobility or incontinence issues, or someone who wanders. It can be like weighing two bad options. But with that said, it's important to have an evacuation plan if you are ordered to evacuate. So consider also where you might need to go if you had to evacuate. There are some special considerations that caregivers need to pay if you have someone that you're caring for who has special needs, or if you have pets, for example. You'll need to pre-register with a shelter. And you can do that at any time, actually, by calling 211 to get information in your local county. Also, if you have the means or ability to stay with friends or with family or at an extended stay hotel, consider those options too. This is one thing we often don't consider when looking at those options is parking. And even though many people drive away from a coast or inland from a storm, torrential rain can cause flooding. I always recommend that people think about trying to park on higher ground or in a garaged parking lot. Now, I know this isn't always an option, but it's something to consider as part of your planning. Look for hotels that have garaged parking. I just begun making a list of pet-friendly hotels along major highways here in Florida. And the ones that I've been looking at do have covered parking, because my greatest worry is evacuating with my pets by car, staying at the motel off the highway, and then having something happen to my car, making it hard for me to return home. Many people here in Florida had that experience a few years back. And I remember the news reporting people, had left Miami and went to Atlanta, and it took them 24 plus hours to drive back home with the traffic. So these are things that you need to consider as well. Does your loved one have the ability to commute in a car for that long if need be? And what would you need to plan if that were the case? So if you're caring with someone and you are planning to evacuate with them, I actually suggest considering to stay in an extended stay hotel within a city, both because they have more choices for parking. Also, if there's a power outage, power is often restored to cities faster than in rural areas. You'll also more likely be closer to hospitals in case of anything happening, as opposed to being in a motel off the highway in the middle of nowhere. The other thing too is that if you have a loved one who wanders, consider a hotel or a motel with an inside hallway, as opposed to those that have doors that open to the outside. Consider also having someone with you to provide respite if possible. And think about as well if the hotel has any handicap accessible rooms if necessary. These are all good things to consider. I know it might seem overwhelming, but that's the point of planning, is that we have the luxury of time and preparing. It's much less overwhelming than if you had to think about all of these things in the event of an emergency and an evacuation. And Google can really help you to plan. There are maps, there are photos. You can also consider different routes and options, east, west, north, south, things that you'd want to be near as well, like grocery stores or pharmacies or healthcare centers, even dialysis clinics. These are things that people don't really think about. So I wanted to ask if anyone participating today had any specific questions that we could help to answer.
So if you have Zoomed in, just unmute your microphone. If you have called in, and there's a couple of people that have called in, press *6 on your individual phone and we'll be able to hear you. We're going to keep it kind of informal, so please.
I have a question. This is Bob.
Okay.
So we moved here, my partner and I, 5.5 years ago from New York City, and we were certainly familiar with snowstorms and icing over and freezes from our decades living on the East Coast. In Austin, Texas, where we live, I found that it wasn't so much that we weren't prepared, it felt like the city wasn't prepared. And what I mean by that is they don't have big trucks everywhere full of salt, and they don't allocate a huge portion of their budget to possible snow and ice storms because they're so rare. So it was the emergency vehicles were wrecking when they were trying to get people. I guess my question is, if you are in a situation, I had a 74-year-old friend of mine who was in her apartment with no heat and no power. And she had a car, but they were telling us not to drive. So she was going into her car and turning it on for the heat. She was sleeping in her car, which makes me very sad. Does anybody have a similar experience possibly that they've been through, and any suggestions or stories from that incident that they might want to share? I felt very helpless that I couldn't just go get her.
Well,
100%. Lucy, go ahead.
no, I totally can understand that. As I was saying before, when the ice storm and we had no electricity in the middle of winter, it was freezing. And my youngest daughter was still just 4 years old, and we were scrambling around to find a hotel room, basically, or some people still had their power. Apart from that, I mean, we were lucky to be able to find a hotel that had some. And the other thing is that I would suggest in all cases like that, what we had to set up here were shelters, actually, in churches and synagogues that had that did have power with their own generators. So it's interesting, Bob, that you're saying that the city was not prepared. This is something that that could be advocated for and lobbied for, to see what kind of arrangements can be made, even if it's once in periodically. It is very important that people know where they can actually go. Some people can't even afford to go to a hotel or a motel. So we did organize very quickly shelters. And we brought all, especially seniors. A lot of seniors came from foster homes into our shelters. A lot of caregivers came, and I'm going to talk about caregiving issues and how to deal with that a little bit more. So I don't know if you have any other suggestions, Elliot.
Sure. Fortunately, the thing with snowstorms is that we were able to plan for them. My suggestion would be ahead of time. And I hate to say this, but we can't always count on our municipal or community services to take care of the needs that we have. And I think we've learned that over time. So it's really important to try to be as self-sufficient as possible and to help plan within your local communities. I remember when the ice storm hit in the late 90s and I was living in Montreal with my parents. We had a rather large home, and my mom invited many older people to come and to stay with us ahead of the storm. We had a total of, I think, 12 or so people staying in our house. Obviously, we did maintain power, but we ran out of food very quickly. Grocery stores were really limited in what they had. I remember my mom was making chickpea salads and macaroni and whatever we had in the house, and being really creative. But the same, I would say, would be true for a hurricane. I have a cousin here who lives independently. She's 91. Certainly, I monitor our weather all the time. If there were a storm to come, she would be with us, and we would make sure that she was not by herself. So that is unfortunately my reality. In my response to your question and advice is that I think the point of planning is to prepare ourselves and not to really count on the resources. That's the thing about going to shelters too, is that shelters don't have food. You have to bring everything with you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about grab and go bags.
Right.
So I hope that
Thank
answers
you.
the question, of course. Another really important thing, please go ahead, sorry.
No, it gave me a great idea, because the person I'm thinking of, the person I'm talking about, is very independent and never wants help. But hearing you talk about your mom inviting the older people into your home and your 91-year-old aging in place cousin, I thought, oh, a great workaround would be if I see really bad weather coming, like really bad, I could invite her over for a slumber party. And I think she would really be into that.
Absolutely.
So, that's a good idea. Thank you.
And I have no doubt that you'll make it fun.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else have a question or a comment at this time? And for those of you that dialed in on your telephone, we did have a question in our chat box asking for, Paula asked, any suggestions for caregivers? What special things should caregivers be thinking about? And Elliot responded that caregivers should consider the specific needs of the care recipient and making decisions about evacuating. And he's going to continue to talk about that. Okay, we're going on with our presentation. It's already 10:30. I can't believe it.
Okay.
Well, one of those really important considerations about your care recipient is medication. And Lucy, I know that you have done programs on safe use of medication. Can you talk a bit about storage of medication in the event of a storm and how to plan?
Yes, I think this is really important. And just for those of you who are interested, there's going to be a session on the 21st, one session, and the following will be in October the 6th. And I speak a lot about not only medication, side effects, storage, and how it affects elderly and especially help for seniors. So as you know, one of the biggest concerns when a hurricane approaches or any kind of a storm is forces people to leave their home is running out of prescription medication and medical supplies that patients need on a regular basis to, to treat chronic conditions. At this time of the year, don't wait to fill prescriptions until you're almost out of them. Ask the doctor for a 90-day supply of medication if you can, for yourself and for the person to whom you are caring. It's really important that way you're more likely to have extra on hand for your medication grab bag. This can also save you money as well. Always fill prescription on the first day you become eligible for a refill rather than waiting until the day you run out. If you're able to obtain an emergency supply, establish a plan for rotating your go-to back supply so that it remains up to date. And remember to check medications periodically to ensure that they have not expired. So during an emergency, some states allow pharmacists to dispense an emergency supply of medication without a doctor's authorization. But if a known potential disaster such as a hurricane is predicted, make sure you have prescription meds and supply before it actually hits. You really have to be prepared. So now you have to know how to store and maintain your medication. Some prescription medication require refrigerations, others may not, but could get damaged by excessive heat. Talk to your pharmacist. They're really one of your best friends. Know about how to handle your medications if the power goes out. Ice packs and cooler bags might be part of your preparation list item. Once you've gathered your supplies, pack the items in an easy to carry water-resistant bag and store it in a dry, cool place in your home. Keep the kit in a secure place that's easy to access in a hurry, but out of reach. For example, on a high shelf in your bedroom closet. Check emergency kit regularly and dispose of, as I said before, of any medication that has expired. If you can at all, bring it back to the pharmacy because we don't. I know you might want to throw it out, but try not to put it into the garbage if possible. So it's also very important to prepare a detailed list of prescription medications. Now, keep it with you inside in a waterproof zipper bag and get a copy to your emergency contact. You should also put all the diseases that you may have or all your conditions that you have. You might consider laminating it or making a pocket or wallet size version, or actually take a picture with your phone. Know how to get medication refills in a disaster area. If your medication gets damaged by water or heat, or if you lose them, make sure that you have refills on file and available at national pharmacy chains like Walgreens, CVS, and even stores like Walmart. Being prepared by keeping a steady supply of your much needed medication is an essential part of your being prepared for any situation. So I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions, or maybe you have some thoughts about other things that we have not discussed yet.
All right, all you have to do is unmute your microphone or unmute your phone by pressing *6, and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, I'm being mindful of our time, so I will continue on then. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box. A lot of this information we've talked about in the context of hurricanes, but it's also very true for winter storms, tornadoes. We talk about hurricanes because they're easier to plan for, but really having a grab and go bag is something that can be part of very general preparedness planning, and it can serve well for tornadoes as well. Tornadoes are some of the hardest natural disasters to prepare for, and that's why there are no, tornado prepare lists like the one that you're seeing here as for hurricanes, because we don't see them coming with several days of warning, unlike hurricanes and snowstorms. They strike fairly unexpectedly and very quickly. So again, because of that, I think it is very important to be prepared at all times, especially if you're living in an area prone to tornadoes, for example. And you might want to start by determining the safest place in your home to get through the storm, obviously staying away from windows, doors, outside walls where possible. Basements are ideal. Otherwise, stay on the lowest floor possible and put as many walls as possible between you and the outside. It's interesting, the home that I live in is from the 50s here in Florida, and they used to build on the inside what is now you would use as a walk-in pantry, but they were hurricane rooms. And they were built on the furthest most inside part of the home, with as much protection away from the outside as possible. And that would be the place where they also had shelving up on top for you to put any emergency supplies. So it's quite interesting how people prepared 75 years ago or so, but really a lot of it is still the same today. There's no difference. So even if you are as well planning to shelter in place for a hurricane, you might want to consider having that grab and go bag, because if you might not be able to access a certain part of your home, or if you have broken glass or something, you may want to stay in that interior space and have what you need with you. Now, there are different resources that have different suggestions about how many days of prescription medications you should have with you. Some say 2 to 3 days, because that would be typically how long it would take to get emergency assistance. But as Bob had shared during a winter storm experience, sometimes that might take longer for streets to get cleared of snow and ice and so on. That was certainly the case in the ice storm that Lucy and I experienced in Quebec. So other resources say to have as much as 2 to 3 weeks of medication on hand. I remember when we've had storms for which people evacuated and then they couldn't get back home for weeks. So I always advise people to plan for the worst as a way of preparing yourself best. Now, I like this checklist of grab and go items because it also has some COVID related items in here. And yes, we are still living through a pandemic, so you may want to have hand sanitizer and masks and things like that as part of your grab and go bag. Now, it can seem overwhelming to put all of these things together, and I recognize that. And remember, at the end of the day, it's just stuff. So if you don't have everything, that is okay. But you want to personalize some of these items as a caregiver so that you have what your care recipient needs. You want to think about clothing that's comfortable, that's easy to get on and off, that might also be easily able to be washed and dries quickly. Velcroed shoes, for example, incontinence products, physician's name, address, phone numbers. Having all that in your phone is great. You may also want to have things like mouthwash if you can't get to, a sink easily to brush your teeth. When there are people that we care for with Alzheimer's and dementia, which we'll speak more about, having scented lotion can be very soothing if they're feeling anxious, just to massage their hands or their feet. Always important, obviously, to have flashlights and batteries, battery operated radio, potentially, or you can have apps on your phone that allow you to access radio and so on. And again, medications. You can find a first aid kit online at Walmart, at Amazon, but you may want to have some basic medications in there. Things for heartburn, things for mosquitoes, for example, a first aid kit if needed, pain relievers. I wanted to specifically mention some things that are very helpful, I think. A battery operated fan can be very helpful because if we lose power and after a storm, if there's been a lot of rain, there can be a lot of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are actually not very good at flying. That's why if you're near a beach or a coast, you'll notice that there are not as many mosquitoes because it's windy. So if you have a battery operated fan, it will not only provide some needed relief perhaps from heat, but it can also help to keep bugs away. The other thing that I think is a wonderful thing to have on hand is this lantern that I have pictured on this slide. If you don't have resources or don't have one, you can also take an empty water bottle, turn it upside down and connect it to a flashlight. The reason why lanterns are very helpful is because for individuals with Alzheimer's and dementia, bright lights can actually be very scary and can sometimes cause anxiety. So what you see atop here on your screen, I have one right here, if you can see it. The top part has a solar panel, and then you can expand it and it becomes a lantern, which I have not actually charged. That light is just from the solar panel. And then in the back over here, there is an outlet for you to be able to charge your phone. And you can do all of that by using solar power. So these types of devices you can find at Walmart, on Amazon. I'm not a paid spokesperson for any of them, but I find that they're very helpful because you can recharge them yourself by using just light. Now, what else was I going to say? If, hold on. The other thing, sorry, is that if you have someone with unique special needs, for example, if there's someone that's using a CPAP machine, and we've had this question before, you might need a small battery backup to be able to power that device to help you sleep. So there are special programs as well. You can access them in your community by calling 211 and seeing what special programs or resources are available for disaster preparedness. We had this question and this person could not afford that generator or battery backup, and they were able to find a program that supplied it. You can also ask your health insurance program, for example. Depending on the state in which you live, there are certain provisions for things like that. The last thing I wanted to say is that all legal important documents, health-related documents, please be sure to keep them in a waterproof zippered bag. Again, you can find those things Target, Walmart, Amazon, but I know it's a lot of information, and like I said, a lot of it's just stuff. But as caregivers, you really have to think about the needs of your care recipient and how you can potentially make someone more comfortable or more safe. And that's part of planning.
Yes, that is very important. I really want to emphasize, I'm looking at the time as well, just to talk about people with dementia and caregivers. So if the person with dementia, Alzheimer's, lives in a residential building or attending a day center, you know, and you cannot reach them, you should learn about the disaster evacuation plans. Find out who's responsible for evacuating everyone in the event of an emergency. So, you know, being a caregiver, you could have placed your loved one, you're still a caregiver, you're still worried. So I think it is important to know what are their procedure. So if you are evacuating with someone who suffers from dementia, there are additional things you want to pack in your bag, including an ID bracelet. I think is very important. A recent picture of the person in case of if they're wandering. Earphones, calming music, loud areas may increase agitation for your loved ones. So I think, you know, anything that you think would sort of keep them calm. You could have simple activities, you know, a small little photo album, or on your phone, obviously there's pictures, whatever it is, any favorite item that the person has. Consider enrolling in a wandering response service, such as those offered by the Medicare Alert Foundation. Contact the Alzheimer's Association. There's a 24/7 hotline. It's 800-272-3900. We will have that information in our references, so you don't have to worry about that. And it's so important to do your best to keep calm. Individuals with dementia disease take cues from their caregivers. If they feel you are panicked or anxious, they will sense that and feel unsafe. You know, scared feelings can cause agitation and challenging behaviors. Keep reassuring them that they are safe and realize that they may not understand what's going on. Use private moments to process your own emotions. So if you're really anxious, it's okay, you're allowed to feel that, but try very hard not to show it to your loved one. The preparation for a storm can often generate even more stress than we experience during the actual event. So that's why it's so important. That's why we're doing this, so that people, you know, if you're in control and you feel that you're prepared, it's easier to deal with situation. You know, Elliot addressed things to take during the evacuation, but when you are sheltering at home, maintain, as we are talking, a 2-week stock of any medical supplies that you need, which including could be incontinence products, diabetic supplies. Ask your doctor to prescribe any necessary medication. So if you're remaining at home, if possible, have other people or friends come to your home to shelter with you, so you have respite if it's possible. Have personal supplies on hand. So, you know, we talked about it, but I think baby wipes are really good for sponge bathing if you don't have water. As Elliot said, antibacterial wipes, hand sanitizers, and mouthwash is really important. You know, though local, state, and federal resources are coordinated to be available within 72 hours, it's, you know, maybe sometimes it's even longer than that. So it's good to establish a safe room, an interior room with no windows. Bring in the supplies, as Elliot said, it's so important. But let's take a look at some of the things. Food is very important, obviously, and I'm sure a lot of you know that, but just let's go over it. You know, canned and jarred meats and fish like tuna, salmon, and chicken, canned fruits packed in juice. Try not to put in syrup because that could make you very thirsty. Canned vegetable powder or evaporated milk, instant coffee, tea, cocoa, nuts, dried food, powdered drinks, you know, juices, soft drinks, small boxes of cereal. Fresh foods are okay. They'll be okay for a couple of days. Bread, muffins, and bagels can last. So if you are sheltering in place, you'll want those same items that Elliot discussed to put in the grab app and make sure that it's there. Keeps, you know, things to keep your loved one occupied is really, really important. And obviously listening to the weather so that you know what is actually happening. We were talking about lighting, so attempt to keep the room well lit is important. As Elliot said, battery operated lanterns, all these things are good to have. And if you are prepared and if you can go and get some of those things as well. Now, I really want to sort of talk about tips to prevent agitation. And we know people with dementia, when you take them out of their environment, they can become agitated. They can become agitated. And so it's so important. And I know it takes a lot of patience to reassure the person, hold hands or put your arms on his or her shoulder, say things that are going and say, you know, reassure them that things are going to be fine. Find outlets for anxious energy, take a walk if possible, engage in a few little tasks, redirect them. Music is amazing. I have to tell you, music really, really calms people. And if you're in, for example, in a place where there's other people, and if the person is really getting agitated, you can move the person to a safer or quieter place if possible. Limit stimulation, make sure the person takes their medication on schedule regular meals, and maintain a regular sleep schedule as much as you can. Avoid a detailed explanation, provide additional assistance with all activities of daily living, because if they're, you know, they're unfamiliar, so you might be doing a lot more than you did before. Pay attention to cues that the person may be overwhelmed, fidgeting, frightened. Remind the person that he or she, they is in the right place, okay? Reassurance is the key. Helpful hints during an episode of agitation. So if they do become agitated and they're restless, approach the person from the front, use his or her or their name, look at them, use calm, positive statements, and with a patient, low-pitched voice, reassure. Respond to the emotion being expressed rather than the content of the words. For example, you can say you're frightened and want to go home. It's okay, I'm right here with you. Don't argue with the person or try to correct. Instead, affirm his or her experience, reassure, and try to divert attention. For example, you can say, the noise in this shelter or in the home is frightening. Let's see if we can find a quieter place. Let's look at our photo book together. So again, redirecting is so very important, and just being very patient and understanding that this individual may not even realize what's going on. And at the end of the day, they're really depending on you. Now, I know there's a lot more that I would have liked to go into, but I want to keep it short. It's amazing how the time just flew. And so, Elliot, I'm just wondering if you have a few words that you want to end with. And I know that Glenda always has some very interesting things that she would like to share as well.
Absolutely.
Or if there's any questions for that matter.
I will keep my conclusion really, really brief so that we do have time for questions and so on. I know, again, we've shared a ton of information. We will be sharing our slides and resources with you all, but if there were some key takeaways from our time together today, it's really to remain calm and to focus on your immediate safety and the safety of the person for whom you are providing care. Evacuating and making that decision can be a very difficult one. So it is important to be able to have that option, and having a grab and go bag can make that much easier. Additionally, I think communication is so key. So for me personally, if I had to have one thing that I knew that I could count upon, it would be my cell phone. And it would be that lantern that I just showed you, because I can even charge my phone with it just by using solar energy, in addition to providing light. So, you know, keeping it simple can make things seem a little bit more manageable. And again, planning in advance is important. When a storm hits, things can sometimes be in short supply or can become more expensive. The lantern that I showed you, I bought for $6 during a flash sale at a store. So if you buy these things when you don't need them and you have them on hand, you're in better shape. Now, finally, we have a ton of resources as always. These are hyperlinks actually that are all underlined that you can link to the actual website or resource. And we'll be sharing this all with you after our program today. Phew, we got it all in. Thank you. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any quick last questions before we turn it back over to Glenda?
*6 will unmute your phone if you have phoned in. Others of you just unmute your microphone. Yes, from area code 231, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say the preparedness list is quite lengthy and it might overwhelm people. So if you really can't afford anything or it's just really overwhelming you, if you could do just a couple things every week, that you would eventually have the list there.
Yeah,
exactly right. That's why I shared earlier, you know, each time I go to the grocery store, I'll pick up one item. And the list is overwhelming. That's why I say at the end of the day, it's just stuff. You know, try to keep it simple and pare it down. And also planning allows us to save money and resources, just like the example I provided with the lantern. I think the one key takeaway, though, that's not on any list that you'll ever see is to maintain your own well-being and know how to find a place of calm and how to manage your stress. And I think that's especially important for caregivers. And that's why we wanted so very much to make that a focus of our program.
And I just want to emphasize, for caregivers who are caring for anyone, especially people with dementia, please keep your eye on them, because it takes just a flash for them to wander off, especially when they're feeling, frightened or scared. And so it takes a lot of patience, that's for sure.
It does. And remember that tip of staying in a hotel that has an indoor corridor as opposed to doors being open to the outside. That makes the risk of wandering a lot less concerning. And you can also let hotel staff know of your concerns so that they can keep an eye out for that person if possible.
All right. I want to remind you that if you register for the call, you will receive a follow-up email in a few days. And in that follow-up email will be all the resources that you see on your screen right now. For those of you that phoned in, we did record this session in its entirety. It will be a podcast, and it will be found on our website at www.caregiverteleconnection, all squished together, caregiverteleconnection.org. And if you ever have any difficulty reaching any of our resources, you can always call our customer service representative. And that number is toll free at 866-390-6491. We have a lot of sessions left in this month, and it's coming to a close quickly. So next Tuesday, I'll be back with you. That's September the 20th at 10 o'clock Central Time. And Dr. Paul Bendheim is going to be talking with us about Alzheimer's and other dementias and how to prevent them. So I think he's going to be talking about brain health, and I would encourage you to join us for that. The one thing you didn't mention, Elliot, and I remember from one of your previous presentations, and I do have my go bag prepared, by the way, and checked my lantern yesterday, and I don't know. I had said to Elliot in a previous presentation, I'm older. I can't pick up all this stuff and get them out into the car. And so we talked about a rolling ice chest is a really good idea. And I wanted to bring that back around because I do think that's an excellent idea to keep in mind as a resource to put all of your things in, and then you just roll them out. Works for me. Yeah. So thank you all for joining us today. I know Lucy and Elliot are most appreciative that you have joined us, as I am. And we want you to stay safe and be prepared. So we hope to see you or hear you on future sessions. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Stay well.
Thanks, everyone. Feel better. Bye.
Bye-bye.